Why did a pious man keep a secret marriage with a Djinn for 40 years without anyone in his family knowing? What was written in the diary he hid for decades that revealed his own grandson's name even before he was born? This story will give you chills from beginning to end. It will show how the bonds between the visible and invisible worlds can span entire generations, shaping destinies in ways we could never imagine. That's why I ask you to listen until the end, because what happened to my grandfather and what I discovered about myself through that diary stained with tears can completely change how you understand the spiritual world around us. My name is Tariq. I'm 28 years old, and all my life I believed I knew my grandfather Rashid. He was the most religious man in our family, the one who never missed a prayer at the mosque, who recited the Quran with a voice trembling with devotion, who fasted beyond Ramadan and always carried a tasbih in his calloused hands. But when he died 3 months ago, we found something no one expected, a diary hidden in the false bottom of his wooden chest. A diary containing 40 years of impossible confessions, conversations with someone we couldn't see, and on the last page, written in his trembling handwriting from his final days, was my name. Not the name my parents gave me, but another name, my true name, the name that, according to the diary, had been chosen by her. The Djinn, who was my grandfather's second wife for 4 decades, living beside him while my human grandmother slept in the next room, completely unaware. And the most frightening part, the diary explained why. It explained the pact. It explained the promise my grandfather made even before I was born. A promise that now, 3 months after his death, began to be fulfilled in ways that make me question everything I know about my own existence. Are you ready for this journey? So let's begin at the beginning, not at the start of the story, but at the moment when everything changed forever. The day I opened that diary and read the first line. If you're reading this, Tariq, then you already know the truth, and she came for you as she promised she would. Before continuing with what happened after I read that terrifying first line, I want to ask something important. Check if you're already subscribed to the channel and leave in the comments the country you're watching from. I want to know how far this story is reaching, because it needs to be heard. Your comment helps more people learn about these accounts that make us question the limits between the visible and invisible. Now, for you to understand the impact of that diary, I need to tell you who my grandfather Rashid was, or rather, who I thought he was. My grandfather was born in 1945 in a small village in the interior of Morocco, in a region where the Atlas Mountains meet the desert. It was a place where people still believed that each water source had its guardian, that each ancient tree sheltered spirits, and that the invisible world of Djinn was as present as the wind that swept the dunes. Rashid grew up in that environment, but he was always different. While other boys played, he spent hours in the mosque with the local imam, memorizing the Quran. By 15, he was already known in 3 neighboring villages as the young man who recited with angels in his voice. People said that when he recited, even the Djinn stopped to listen. In 1968, at 23 years old, he married my grandmother Fatima in a simple ceremony. She was a sweet woman with a shy smile who took care of the house with devotion and gave him 5 children. My father was the 3rd. On the outside, they were the perfect couple, religious, respected, united. But there was something no one knew, something that began exactly 6 months after the wedding. It was on a full moon night, according to the diary. Rashid had gone to the ancient well on the outskirts of the village to perform wudu before Fajr prayer. It was his custom. He preferred the water from that specific well, said it was purer. What he didn't know was that that well was the territory of a Djinn named Zarqa. In the diary, my grandfather described that first encounter with details that made me tremble. He was bending down to get water when he felt a presence. It wasn't threatening, but it was intense, as if the air itself had become dense. When he raised his eyes, she was there. She wasn't like we imagined Djinn, my grandfather wrote in his careful handwriting. She wasn't pure fire or shapeless smoke. She chose to appear as a woman, but there was something in her eyes and a depth and antiquity that made it clear she wasn't human. Her eyes were like bottomless wells, and when she spoke, her voice echoed as if coming from a very distant place. Zarqa didn't come to frighten him. She came with a request. "Rashid, son of Ahmed," she said, and my grandfather wrote that hearing his name on her lips was like hearing gentle thunder. "I hear you pray every morning. Your voice is beautiful to Allah's ears and to mine. For 40 days I've been coming to this well just to hear your prayers, and now I need to ask you something I know seems impossible. My grandfather, paralyzed between fear and fascination, could only whisper, "What do you want from me?" "I want you to accept me," Zarka replied, "not as a threat, not as a burden, but as a companion on the spiritual path. We Djinn also seek closeness to Allah, and I chose you to help me on this journey." That's when she made the proposal that would change everything, a spiritual marriage, not as humans understand it, but as a pact of mutual companionship on the path of faith. She would live beside him, invisible to everyone except Rashid, learning about devotion through his example, protecting his family from invisible evils, and in return, he would guide her spiritually. "And if I refuse?" my grandfather asked, his voice trembling. "Then I will leave and you will never see me again," Zarka replied simply. "There is no threat here, Rashid, just a request, but know that if you accept, I will be linked to your lineage. And there's something you need to know about the grandson you will have." That's when she mentioned my name for the first time, the name that would only be revealed on the last page of the diary. My grandfather, that morning in 1969, said yes, and for 40 years he lived 2 parallel marriages, one with my grandmother Fatima, visible and public, blessed by the community, and another with Zarka, invisible and secret, known only to him and the Djinn who witnessed the pact. The diary documented everything. My grandfather's wake was last spring on a day when the wind carried the smell of jasmine and desert dust. The whole family came, uncles I hadn't seen in years, distant cousins, neighbors who grew up hearing Rashid's recitations echoing through the village. More than 200 people gathered to say goodbye to the man everyone considered a model of piety. My grandmother Fatima, now 82 years old and nearly blind, cried silently while the women consoled her. She had been married to him for 57 years, and now she was alone. Or at least, that's what we all thought. 3 days after the burial, when the house finally emptied and only the closest family remained, my father called me to help organize grandfather's belongings. It was a painful but necessary task. Each object carried memories: the worn tasbih he always carried, the old copies of the Quran with notes in the margins, the simple clothes that smelled of incense and prayer. It was my younger brother, Karim, who found the chest. It was in the darkest corner of the room, covered by a prayer rug that seemed not to have been moved in decades. The chest was made of cedar wood, carved with Quranic verses, heavy and locked. "Does anyone have the key to this?" Karim asked, shaking the old padlock. My father frowned. "I didn't know this chest existed. I never saw my father use it." We searched everywhere, in drawers, in the pockets of old clothes, even asked Grandma Fatima, who just shook her head, confused. "Your grandfather had his secrets," was all she said, and something in her tone made me think she knew more than she was saying. In the end, we had to force the padlock. When the lid finally opened with a long creak, a wave of old perfumed air escaped. It smelled of sandalwood, old paper, something I can't describe. It was as if time itself had a scent. Inside there were few things. A small silver box with earth, from what I later discovered, was the well where my grandfather met Zarka. A green silk scarf that looked new despite the years, some smooth stones with Arabic inscriptions I didn't recognize, and at the bottom, wrapped in white cloth, the diary. It was a brown leather notebook, about the size of a pocket Quran tied with a worn cord. When I held it in my hands, I felt an inexplicable chill run up my spine. It was as if the object were alive, pulsing with some kind of energy I couldn't name. "What is this?" my father asked, peering over my shoulder. I opened to the first page. My grandfather's handwriting, the one I knew so well from his notes in the Quran, filled the pages in careful lines. The date of the first entry was September 15th, 1969. "It looks like a diary," I replied, flipping through quickly. There were hundreds of pages, all filled, some stained as if water or tears had fallen on them. My father extended his hand. "Let me see." But something made me hesitate. I don't know why, but I felt that diary wasn't meant to be read by everyone. It was personal, intimate, perhaps even dangerous. I closed it quickly. "I'll read it first," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "If there's anything the family needs to know, I'll tell you." My father seemed to want to argue, but something in my face made him agree. "All right, but don't take long, Tariq. We need to know what my father was hiding in that chest." That night, alone in my room at the family house, I lit a lamp and opened the diary again. My hands were trembling slightly. The first page had only one line, written in red ink instead of the black that filled the rest of the diary. "This is the record of a pact that no one can know. If you're reading this, Rashid has already departed. And if you are Tariq, my grandson, then it's time to know the truth about who you really are. My heart raced. How did he know it would be me who found this? How did he know my name, writing this decades before I was born? I turned the page. The second entry was dated the same day as the first, and began like this. Today I met Zarka. She asked me for something that goes against everything I learned about marriage, about family, about what is right. But when I looked in her eyes, those eyes that have seen centuries pass, I understood that this wasn't an ordinary request. It was a calling, and Allah places callings in our lives that test everything we think we know about ourselves. I continued reading, page after page, and with each word, the reality I knew began to crumble like sand slipping through fingers. My grandfather didn't just meet a Djinn, he accepted a spiritual marriage with her, and for 40 years she lived beside him, invisible to everyone but present in every moment of his life. Zarka ate when he ate, even though no one saw. She slept when he slept, even though only he felt her presence in the room. She accompanied him to the mosque, invisible but devout, praying beside him. She knew all the family secrets, witnessed every birth, every death, every joy, and every sorrow. And my grandmother, Fatima, according to the diary, she knew, or at least on some level she always knew. There were described moments where Fatima would place 2 cups of tea on the table, even though she was alone with Rashid. Moments where she would speak to the air, as if conversing with someone invisible. Moments where she would say, "Give my regards to your other wife," with a sad but understanding smile. It was an impossible arrangement, but somehow it worked. Up to page 50, the diary was fascinating, but understandable within the limits of the extraordinary. But then I reached the entry from 1997, 28 years after the pact began. The handwriting was shaky, hurried, different from my grandfather's usual care. The date was 2 months before my birth. Zarka revealed something to me tonight that filled me with both fear and reverence. She said that the reason she accepted this pact, the reason she asked to be linked to my lineage, wasn't just to learn about devotion. It was because she saw. Djinn sometimes can see fragments of the future. Not clearly, but like reflections in murky water. She saw my grandson, saw a boy who would be born with a gift that crosses worlds. A boy who would be able to see what others don't see, hear what others don't hear. A boy who would be a bridge. She said his name already exists in the invisible world even before existing in the visible. And that name is... The page ended there. The next was blank, as if my grandfather hadn't had the courage to write more at that moment. I flipped through quickly, searching, my heart beating so hard I felt it in my temples. Most of the following pages documented daily life, prayers, conversations with Zarka about Quran interpretations, moments of doubt and faith, until I reached the last page of the diary. The date was 3 weeks before my grandfather's death. The handwriting was almost illegible, trembling severely, but I managed to decipher, "My time is running out. I feel death approaching like an old friend. Zarka says that when I depart, she will remain. The pact doesn't end with my death. It transfers. And now I must write what I promised never to reveal. The true name of my grandson, the name that exists in the world of Djinn before existing in that of humans, the name that will make him a bridge between worlds, is Malik al-Ghaib, the king of the invisible. Tariq is just the name his parents gave him, but Malik al-Ghaib is who he really is. And now that I have departed, Zarka will go to him. She will fulfill the promise. And my grandson will discover that he can see what has always been there, but which he never perceived. Forgive me, Tariq. Forgive me for this burden. But also, thank Allah, because it is also a gift. I closed the diary, my hands trembling violently. The lamp beside me flickered once, twice, and then I heard it. A feminine voice, soft as running water, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Finally, Malik, I was waiting for you to discover." I turned slowly, and there, sitting in the chair beside my bed, was she, Zarka. I didn't scream. Maybe I should have screamed, but my voice simply disappeared, as if someone had ripped the air from my lungs. I stayed there, frozen, holding the diary against my chest like a useless shield, staring at the figure sitting in the chair that seconds before had been empty. Zarka wasn't what I expected. 40 years hearing stories about Djinn, creatures of smokeless fire, terrifying beings that could possess, drive mad, destroy. But she was there, apparently solid, apparently real, and apparently patient. She had chosen a human form, as my grandfather had described. She looked about 40 years old, perhaps, But there was something in her eyes that betrayed her real age. They were dark eyes, too deep, as if you could fall into them and never stop falling. She wore simple clothes, a long dress of fabric that seemed to subtly change color when she moved, oscillating between sea green and silver gray. A hijab covered her hair, and she wore it with the naturalness of someone who has worn it for centuries. The most disturbing thing wasn't her appearance. It was the sensation she emanated. It wasn't threatening, but it was intense. It was like being near something very ancient, very powerful, but contained. Like standing beside an ocean on a calm night. You know there are immense depths there, but they're tranquil at the moment. "Breathe, Tariq," she said, and her voice had that echoing quality my grandfather had described. It wasn't loud, but it resonated, as if coming from inside my own chest. "I didn't come to hurt you. I came to fulfill a promise made long ago." I finally managed to breathe, a strangled gasp that burned my throat. You're real." A small smile, almost sad, curved her lips. "As real as you, just made of different substance. Your grandfather never told you about me?" "No." My voice came out as a hoarse whisper. No one knew. I found the diary today. I just finished reading about you." "Ah." She tilted her head, thoughtful. "So everything is happening faster than Rashid planned. He wanted you to have time to process, to understand gradually. But destiny has its own rhythm. My mind was racing, trying to grasp something that made sense. You said you were waiting. Waiting for what? Why are you here? Why now?" Zarka stood up from the chair, and the movement was too fluid, unnatural in its grace. She approached the window, looking at the night sky where the crescent moon shone among the stars. "I'm here because I made a pact with your grandfather 40 years ago, a pact that didn't end with his death, but transferred. And now, Malik al-Ghaib, it's time for you to understand what that means." "Don't call me that," I reacted instinctively. "My name is Tariq." She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw something that seemed like genuine compassion in her ancient eyes. "Tariq is the name your parents gave you, and it's beautiful. But Malik al-Ghaib is the name you carry in the invisible world. It's the name that was written for you even before you were born. And now that your grandfather is gone, now that you've read the diary, the veil between worlds has begun to thin for you." "I don't understand. What do you mean by veil? What's happening to me?" Zarka sat down again, this time on the edge of my bed, and I instinctively backed away. She noticed and stopped, keeping her distance. "Let me explain in the simplest way I can," she began. "You know that two worlds coexist, right? The world of humans made of flesh and bone, and the world of Djinn made of fire and energy. Most humans can't see our world. The veil between them is thick, protective. But some people are born with a thinner veil. Some people are natural bridges. And you're saying I'm one of those people? Not just a bridge, Malik. You are a royal bridge, a rare one. That's why the name King of the Invisible. You were chosen even before being born to be someone who can walk between worlds without losing your sanity or your soul. It's a gift, and also a burden." My head was spinning. I tried to hold on to logic, rationality. "This is crazy. I'm having a breakdown. I read that crazy diary of my grandfather's and now I'm hallucinating. You're not real." "If I'm not real," Zarka said calmly, "then how do you explain this?" She extended her hand and from her palms sprouted light. Not ordinary light, but something that seemed liquid and solid at the same time, dancing in the air like aquatic flames. The walls of the room began to change. Not physically, but it was as if a second layer of reality had become visible. I could see shapes, shadows, small creatures dancing in the corners, entities that seemed made of smoke and wind observing through the cracks. "Do you see now?" she asked softly. "They've always been here. Always. But you could never see until this moment. Until the veil began to thin for you. I could see. God, I could see. And it was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. The room I'd known for years was suddenly alive with invisible movement. Small Djinn, which Zarka later explained were lesser Djinn, almost like children of their race, played in the shadows. A larger one with eyes of fire watched from the door. And there were others, forms I couldn't fully comprehend, existing somewhere between material and immaterial. "Make it stop," I whispered, squeezing my eyes shut. "Please make it stop. It's too much." The light in Zarka's hands extinguished, and immediately the room returned to normal. The entities disappeared from my vision, though I now knew they were still there, just invisible again. "Forgive me," she said, and it sounded genuine. "I didn't mean to overwhelm you, but you needed to see to believe. And now that you've seen once, Malik, you'll start to see more. The veil doesn't thicken again once it's begun to thin. I sat heavily on the bed, the diary falling from my lap. My hands were trembling. Why? Why did my grandfather agree to this? Why would he do this to me? Because he loved me, Zarka replied simply, and there was real sadness in her voice. Not in the same way he loved Fatima, but he loved me, and because I showed him fragments of the future. I showed him what you could become, someone who could help both worlds, someone who could be a mediator between Djinn and humans, who could bring understanding where there is only fear. I didn't ask for this. No one asks for their gifts, Malik. Do you think your grandfather asked to have that voice that made even Djinn stop to listen? Do you think I asked to be born with the ability to see the future in fragments? We receive what Allah determines for us, and then we choose what to do with it. I looked at her, really looked, and saw something I didn't expect. Loneliness. This ancient, powerful creature who had lived for centuries was deeply alone. She had spent 40 years beside my grandfather, invisible to everyone except him, witnessing a family that wasn't hers, living on the margins of a world that couldn't fully embrace her. You really loved him, I realized aloud. My grandfather. You really loved him. Her eyes filled with something that looked like tears, though nothing fell. Rashid was the first human who saw me not as a threat, not as a demon, but as a creature of Allah seeking closeness to the Creator. He taught me things no Djinn could. He taught me patience. He taught me how faith can exist even in doubt. And yes, I learned to love him, as a companion, as a student, as a friend walking the spiritual path together. And my grandmother? Did she really know? Fatima always knew deep in her heart. She chose peace instead of war. She chose to trust in Allah and in her husband, and I respected her for that, Malik. I never tried to replace her. I never wanted to. Each of us had our place in Rashid's life, and that was enough. We were silent for a long moment. Outside I heard the distant call to Fajr prayer echoing from some nearby mosque. Zarka immediately stood up. I need to go, she said. Prayer time has come, and even invisible I prefer to pray away from curious eyes. But I'll return, Malik. Now that the pact has transferred, now that you can see me, we need to talk about what comes next, about what your grandfather wanted you to know, and about what I promised to protect. Wait, I called when she began to fade, literally fade like smoke dispersing. What did you promise to protect? She stopped in the process of disappearing, half solid, half translucent, and smiled, a sad smile that carried the weight of decades. You, Malik al-Ghaib, I promised your grandfather I would protect you, because in the coming months when the gift fully manifests, when you begin to see our world without filter, there will be Djinn who won't accept your existence well. There will be those who see you as a threat, and there will be those who will try to use you. Use me? For what? To cross the boundary between worlds in ways that shouldn't be crossed, to break barriers that Allah placed for reasons. You are a bridge, Malik, and bridges can be used in both directions. And then she disappeared completely, leaving only the faint smell of incense and rose water in the air. I sat there for a long time as the sun began to rise, tinting the sky pink and gold. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, about reality itself had been turned upside down in a single night. And the scariest part, a part of me, a deep part I didn't know existed, had recognized Zarka the moment I saw her, as if my soul knew her before my eyes even saw her. I picked up the diary again, opening to a random page. The entry was from 15 years ago when I was 13. Today I saw Tariq playing in the garden, and Zarka was watching. She said something that made me laugh. He has your eyes, Rashid, and my ability to see beyond. I asked what she meant and she just smiled. One day he'll understand. One day he'll see what he's always been seeing without knowing. I closed the diary and looked around my room with new eyes. How many times had she been here? How many times throughout my entire life had Zarka watched me, invisible, waiting for this moment? And more importantly, now that the veil was thinning, what else would I begin to see? The answer came faster than I expected. When I looked at the mirror on the wall, I saw my normal reflection, but for a fraction of a second, I saw something else too. A second figure standing behind me, translucent but distinct. I turned quickly. There was no one there. But when I looked at the mirror again, the figure was still there, watching. And slowly, very slowly, it waved. I realized then that my life would never be the same. The king of the invisible had awakened, and the invisible world had noticed. The 3 days following my encounter with Zarka were the strangest of my life. So I didn't tell anyone what had happened. How could I? Dad, I met Grandpa's Djinn's second wife, and now I can see invisible creatures isn't exactly a conversation you have over breakfast, but the signs began to accumulate in ways I couldn't ignore. On the first morning, I woke up and found wet footprints on my bedroom floor. They weren't mine. They were smaller, delicate, and led from the window to the door. When I touched them, the water was strangely warm and smelled of spices I couldn't identify. At breakfast, my grandmother Fatima stared at me with her nearly blind eyes and said something that chilled me. She came to see you, didn't she? Finally. When I asked who, she just smiled and went back to eating, as if she hadn't said anything extraordinary. In the afternoon, while helping organize the last of Grandfather's things, I began to hear whispers. They weren't human voices. They were multiple, overlapping, speaking in languages I didn't know but somehow understood. Fragmented conversations about the new bridge and the one who sees and Rashid's grandson, the protected one. At the mosque, during Maghrib prayer, I saw for the first time what Zarka had shown me, the Djinn who prayed with us. There weren't many, maybe 5 or 6, but they were there, in their own rows, invisible to everyone except me. One of them, a tall Djinn with eyes that glowed like embers, stared at me throughout the entire prayer. It wasn't threatening, but it was intense, as if evaluating me. "Did you see anything strange in there?" my cousin asked as we left. "You kept staring at the empty corner the whole time." "It wasn't empty," I replied without thinking, and then quickly fell silent. The night brought the most disturbing event. I woke at 3 in the morning with the feeling that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes and saw 3 figures standing around my bed. They weren't human. One seemed made of black smoke, another glowed with a sickly light, and the third was so distorted it hurt my eyes to try to focus on it. My heart raced. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed. "Is this him?" the smoke figure asked, its voice like rolling gravel. "Yes, Rashid's chosen one, the one Zarka protects," replied the luminous one. "He is weak." "He won't last," said the distorted one, and extended something that could be a hand in my direction. That's when Zarka appeared. She didn't walk into the room. She simply materialized between me and the figures, and her presence was like a wave of power that made the others recoil. "Leave now." Her voice was no longer soft. It was pure command. "You can't protect him forever, Zarka of the ancient well," the smoke figure challenged. "Rashid's pact died with him. The boy owes us nothing. The pact lives as long as I live, and Malik is under my protection until he chooses his own path. Now leave before I make you leave." The 3 figures dissolved, but not before the distorted one whispered, "We'll see how long your protection lasts." Zarka turned to me, and for the first time I saw weariness in her face. "Are you all right?" I managed to nod, still trembling. "Who were they? Why did they want to hurt me?" "They didn't want to hurt. They wanted to test. To see if you're strong enough, worthy enough. Some Djinn believe humans shouldn't have the gift of seeing our world. They think it's a transgression of the natural order." She sat on the edge of my bed, and this time I didn't pull back. "And others want to use you. A human who can see both worlds is valuable, Malik. Very valuable." "I don't want this," I whispered. "I didn't ask for this." "I know, but now you have it, and we need to decide what to do next." The next morning I made a decision. If I was going to be pursued by Djinn, if I was going to see things no one else saw, then I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to learn. "I want to know everything," I told Zarka when she appeared in my room that afternoon. "About the pact, about my grandfather, about this gift, everything." She considered for a moment. "That will take time, and it will change you forever." "It's already changed." "True." A small smile. "Then let's start with the complete story. Sit down." Over the next few hours, Zarka told me everything. How she had lived in that well for 300 years. How she had seen empires rise and fall. How she had grown weary of the loneliness of the Djinn world where spirituality was less valued than raw power. How my grandfather's voice reciting the Quran every morning had touched something in her that had been dormant for centuries. "Your grandfather taught me that strength isn't domination but patience. That power isn't control but surrender to Allah. I spent 40 years learning what it means to be devout, not just by nature, but by choice." Her eyes filled with that ancient sadness again. "And now he's gone and I'm here. But the pact wasn't just about me learning from him. It was about preparing you." "Why me?" I asked for the 100th time. "Why not my father or my uncle or anyone else?" "Because you were born at the right time under the right signs. Because your soul was already predisposed. The Djinn, who can see fragmented futures, saw you before you were born, Malik. They saw someone who could be a bridge without breaking. That's rare. So rare that perhaps there are only 3 or 4 like you alive in the world right now. She then taught me the basic rules. How to protect my mind from malicious jinn using specific verses from the Quran. How to distinguish between jinn who were devout Muslims and those who followed other paths, or none. How to understand that the invisible world had its own social structure, its own laws, as complex as human ones. But above all, she emphasized, remember, you are human. Don't try to be jinn. Don't try to have our power. Your strength is in being the bridge, not in choosing a side. The true revelation came a week later, when Zaka took me to the well where it all began. It was night and the place was deserted. The ancient well was a few kilometers from the village, hidden among twisted olive trees. There's something your grandfather made me promise never to reveal while he lived, Zaka said, looking at the dark waters. But now that he's gone, you need to know. She touched the surface of the water, and it began to glow. Images formed. Memories, I realized. Her memories. I saw my young grandfather, 23 years old, afraid but fascinated. I saw the exact moment when Zaka made her proposal to him, but then I saw something more. I saw the real reason she asked for the pact. I was dying, Zaka confessed, as the images showed her form fading, becoming translucent. Jinn can die, Malik. Not from old age, but from spiritual loneliness. When we isolate ourselves completely, when we lose purpose, our essence begins to dissipate. I was in that process. Your grandfather saved me by giving me purpose again. So the pact wasn't about preparing me, it was about saving you. It was about both. I needed spiritual anchoring. Your grandfather needed a companion on the mystical path that his human wife couldn't be. And you were the fruit of that balance, the next generation, the one who would be born with the gift naturally because you were conceived while 2 worlds coexisted harmoniously. The images changed. They showed my birth, but from a perspective no human saw. They showed jinn gathered, watching, whispering. They showed Zaka weaving invisible protections around me. They showed my grandfather crying with joy and fear at the same time. You were blessed and cursed from the beginning, Malik. Blessed D with the gift, cursed with the burden. And now that the veil has thinned completely, other jinn know what you are, and they will come. They'll come for what? Some to test you, others to use you, and some, she hesitated, some to kill you before you become too powerful. The weeks that followed were a constant test of everything I thought I knew about faith, reality, and my own identity. I began to see the invisible world not just in glimpses, but constantly. Every shadow could hide a jinn. Every breeze could carry whispers from the other side. At work, I found myself distracted, staring at corners where my colleagues saw nothing. But I saw entities observing, evaluating, waiting. My boss called me into his office twice to ask if everything was okay at home. You seem distant, he said, concern in his voice. Is it still about your grandfather's death? If only he knew. If only I could tell him that his office had 3 jinn lounging on the filing cabinets, discussing the state of human affairs in a language that sounded like wind through broken glass. Yes, I lied, still processing the grief. But the real test came when Zaka presented me with a choice that would define everything. It was a Friday night, and she appeared in my room with an urgency I hadn't seen before. Her usual calm composure was replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Malik, we need to talk. Now. I sat up in bed, immediately alert. What happened? The council has convened, she said, pacing in a way that made her form flicker between solid and translucent. The Djinn Council that governs interactions between our world and yours. They've heard about you, about a human who can see fully into our realm, and they want to meet you. Meet me. Why? To determine if you're a threat or an asset. To decide if the veil should be forcibly thickened for you, or if you should be eliminated. My blood ran cold. Eliminated? They can do that? They can try. But that's not the real issue, Malik. She stopped pacing and looked directly at me. They're offering you a choice. Come before the council, submit to their judgment, accept whatever restrictions they place on your gift, or reject their authority and live as a renegade, with both jinn and human worlds potentially against you. That's not a choice, that's a threat. No, Zaka said softly, it's a test. Your grandfather faced a similar one when he accepted me. He had to choose between the comfortable certainty of a normal life and the uncertain path of walking between worlds. Now you must choose. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sleeping village. How simple everything looked from here. Houses with families inside, people living ordinary lives, unaware that invisible beings debated their fate in councils humans would never see. What happens if I refuse to go? They will come to you, and they won't be as patient as I am. Some on the council believe that humans with your gift are abominations, mistakes in the fabric of reality that need to be corrected. And if I go, you face judgment. You might be stripped of your gift, your memories altered, so you forget all of this. Or they might bind you with restrictions so severe that you'll wish they had taken the gift entirely. She paused. Or, if you prove yourself worthy, they might accept you, grant you protection, allow you to truly become what you were meant to be, a bridge between worlds. I turned to face her. What would my grandfather do? Zarka's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Rashid would do what his heart told him was right, regardless of the consequences. He would face the council with the same courage he faced me that morning at the well. Afraid, yes, but willing to step into the unknown if it meant serving a greater purpose. And you? What do you think I should do? I think, she said slowly, that running from who you are is a slower death than any the council could give you. I think your grandfather didn't sacrifice 40 years of secrecy just so you could hide from your destiny. She moved closer. But I also think that the choice must be yours and yours alone. I can protect you from individual Djinn, but I cannot protect you from the council. If you go knowing I cannot save you. I sat back down on the bed, my head in my hands. Everything in me wanted to scream, to reject this impossible situation, to wake up and find it was all a nightmare. But I knew it wasn't. The diary was real. Zarka was real. The invisible world pressing against the edges of my vision was real. And if I was honest with myself, a part of me, the part that had always felt slightly out of step with the world, that had always sensed there was more to reality than what I could see, that part recognized this moment as inevitable. When? I asked finally. 3 days, the new moon. They convene at the boundary place, where the Atlas Mountains meet the desert, where my well still stands. Midnight. Will you come with me? To the boundary, yes. But into the council chamber? She shook her head. I am bound to you by the pact, but the council's domain is beyond even that. You will stand before them alone, Malik, as your grandfather once stood before me alone. 3 days, 72 hours to decide if I would embrace or reject everything I'd discovered about myself. The 3 days passed like a fever dream. I went through the motions of normal life, work, family dinners, helping my father sort through more of grandfather's belongings, but my mind was elsewhere, preparing for what was to come. On the morning of the 3rd day, I visited my grandmother Fatima. She sat in her usual chair, nearly blind eyes staring at nothing, but when I entered the room, she turned her head toward me with uncanny precision. You're going to them tonight, she said. Not a question, a statement. I sat beside her, taking her weathered hand in mine. You knew. All along you knew. I knew Rashid had secrets. I knew there was someone else sharing our life, invisible but present, and I knew that one day, one of our grandchildren would inherit that connection. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Your grandfather visited me in a dream last week. He told me you'd found the diary, that you'd met her. Zarka. Yes, the name he whispered in his sleep for 40 years. There was no bitterness in her voice, only a weary acceptance. He told me to tell you something. Are you listening, Tariq? Yes, grandmother. He said, tell my grandson that courage isn't the absence of fear, but faith in the face of it. Tell him that being a bridge means sometimes standing alone in the middle, with nothing on either side but your own conviction. Tell him I'm proud of who he's becoming, even though I'm sorry for the burden I placed on him. Tears streamed down my face. I don't know if I can do this. Neither did he that morning at the well, but he did, and look what came from it. 40 years of hidden grace, a love that transcended worlds, and a grandson who might change everything. She pulled me close, her ancient voice in my ear. Go to them, Tariq. Go as Malik al-Ghaib, and remember, you carry not just your grandfather's legacy, but Allah's purpose. Trust in that. That night, Zarka led me through the desert to the ancient well. The moon was a thin sliver, barely visible, and the stars blazed with an intensity I'd never seen. As we walked, I saw them. Hundreds of Djinn, perhaps thousands, invisible to normal eyes, but clear to mine, lining the path like spectators at a trial. They've come to witness, Zarka explained. It's been nearly a century since a human stood before the council. You are significant, Malik. Whether you live or die tonight, you will be remembered. At the well, She stopped. "This is where I leave you. The entrance to the council chamber is through the well itself. You must descend alone." I looked at the dark water, then back at her. "Thank you for everything, for protecting me, for teaching me, for loving my grandfather. If you survive this," she said, and I noticed she said, "if not when, we will continue your education. If you don't," she touched my face gently, "then know that you faced your destiny with courage. That is all anyone can ask." I turned to the well and began to descend the ancient stones. As I climbed down, the stone walls began to glow with symbols, ancient script that I somehow could read, telling the history of pacts between Djinn and humans, of bridges who came before me, of trials and triumphs and failures. At the bottom, instead of water, I found a doorway of pure light. I stepped through. The council chamber was impossible to describe with human words. It existed in multiple dimensions, simultaneously. The walls were made of solidified time. The ceiling showed all possible futures branching like a cosmic tree. The floor was memory itself, and when I looked down, I saw every moment of my life, my grandfather's life, and lives stretching back generations. 7 beings sat in a semicircle before me. Not Djinn in the sense I'd come to understand. These were something older, something that existed before the division between visible and invisible, matter and energy. The central figure spoke, and its voice was like the first word ever spoken, echoing through all of creation. "Malik al-Ghaib, grandson of Rashid, human who sees. You stand at the threshold between worlds, and we must determine, are you bridge or breach?" I stood as tall as I could, forcing my voice not to shake. "I am what my grandfather's faith and Zarka's love made me. I did not choose this gift, but I will not reject it. I am a bridge, because I must be." Brave words. But bridges can be used by darkness as easily as light. Bridges can become invasions. What prevents you from becoming a threat to the balance we maintain? "My faith," I said simply, "the same faith that guided my grandfather through 40 years of impossibility. I don't seek to conquer or control. I seek to understand, to serve as my grandfather served, in humility, in devotion, in recognition that both our worlds are creations of Allah." Another figure spoke, its voice like frost forming on glass. "Pretty theology, but theory is not reality. We will test your worthiness. We will show you the true cost of being a bridge. And then you will choose, accept our binding or die." The chamber dissolved, and I found myself standing in a vision. No, multiple visions, multiple realities, all existing simultaneously. In one, I saw myself using my gift to gain wealth, manipulating Djinn to serve my desires, becoming drunk on the power of seeing what others couldn't. I saw myself ending alone, mad, consumed by the very gift I'd thought to master. In another, I saw myself as a true bridge, guiding lost Djinn toward faith, helping humans understand the invisible world, preventing conflicts before they began. But I saw the cost: eternal loneliness, never fully belonging to either world, always standing in between, always serving, never resting. In a third, I saw myself renouncing the gift, accepting the council's binding, returning to a normal life. I saw myself growing old in comfortable ignorance, the memory of Zarka and my grandfather's secret fading like a dream. Safe, simple, empty. "Choose," the council commanded. "Which path will you walk?" I stood in that place between realities, and for the first time since finding the diary, I felt absolute clarity. "I choose the bridge," I said, "not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. My grandfather carried this burden alone for 40 years, but I don't have to. I have Zarka. I have the memory of his faith, and I have the knowledge that every lonely moment, every sacrifice, serves something greater than myself." I looked directly at the 7 ancient beings. "So bind me if you must. Test me however you will. But know this: I am Malik al-Ghaib, not because I want power, but because I accept purpose, and I will serve that purpose until the day I die." Silence. Then, slowly, the central figure stood. And for the first time, something that might have been approval flickered across its incomprehensible features. "So be it. Malik al-Ghaib, we recognize you as bridge, but know this: we do not grant you power. We grant you responsibility. You will be bound by laws that govern the threshold between worlds. You will serve as mediator, never as master. And if you ever break these laws, the punishment will be absolute." The figure raised something that might have been a hand, and I felt energy pour into me. Not power in the way I'd feared, but knowledge. understanding, the rules that governed Djinn-human interaction, the boundaries that must never be crossed, the sacred trust that came with being a bridge. One final gift, the central figure said, so you remember both the honor and the weight of what you carry. It touched my forehead, and suddenly I really saw what my grandfather had lived with for 40 years. The loneliness, the secrecy, the constant balance between two loves, two worlds, two realities. The fear that he'd made the wrong choice, the hope that it would all mean something in the end. And I saw the moment he died, saw Zarka holding his invisible hand as he breathed his last, saw him smile, finally free of the weight, finally able to rest. Saw him whisper, "Take care of my grandson. He's stronger than he knows." I collapsed, overwhelmed by the vision, by the weight of everything I now understood. When I opened my eyes, I was back at the well's surface. Dawn was breaking. Zarka knelt beside me, her eyes wide with wonder and relief. "You survived," she breathed. "You actually survived the council's judgment. Do you know how rare that is?" I sat up slowly, feeling different, not more powerful, but more complete. As if a part of me that had always been missing had finally clicked into place. "They accepted me," I said. "But Zarka, I saw everything. I saw what my grandfather carried. I saw you holding his hand when he died. I saw—" My voice broke. She pulled me into an embrace, and for the first time I let myself cry. For my grandfather, for the weight he'd carried, for the strange, impossible love that had spanned 40 years, for the burden I'd now accepted. "You're not alone," Zarka whispered. "That's what Rashid wanted you to understand. He walked this path alone, but you don't have to. I'm here, and now the council has recognized you. Others will come. Djinn who seek guidance, humans who somehow sense the truth. You will build bridges, Malik, actual bridges of understanding. That's your gift." The year that followed my encounter with the council was one of transformation. Word spread through the invisible world that a new bridge had been recognized. Djinn began to seek me out, not to test or threaten, but to ask questions, to seek guidance, to bridge their own gaps between tradition and modern existence. I learned that many Djinn struggled with faith, just as humans did, that they had doubts, fears, hopes, that they weren't the fearsome creatures of nightmare stories, but beings trying to navigate existence just like us. I also began to recognize other humans with the gift, rare, scattered across the world, but present. We found each other through dreams, through coincidences that weren't coincidences, a network of bridges, each serving in their own way, each carrying their own version of my grandfather's burden. My family remained mostly unaware, though grandmother Fatima watched with knowing eyes until she passed peacefully 6 months after my trial. Her last words to me were, "Tell them I'm coming, Rashid. Tell them I'm finally coming." I know she's with him now, and I know that Zarka visits their resting place sometimes, invisible to others, paying respects to the man who changed everything for her. My work life changed too. I left my office job and became a counselor of sorts, though not in any traditional sense. People came to me with problems they couldn't explain, feelings they couldn't articulate, sense of being watched or haunted, or called by something beyond themselves. Sometimes it was mental illness that needed medical treatment, but sometimes it was real. Sometimes they were genuinely experiencing touches from the invisible world, and I could help them understand, cope, navigate. I never advertised. Word just spread. There's this guy who gets it, who doesn't think you're crazy, who can actually help. Zarka remained my constant companion and teacher. She taught me nuances of Djinn culture, hierarchies, customs. She taught me how to mediate disputes between Djinn and humans who unknowingly shared spaces. She taught me when to intervene and when to let both worlds find their own balance. And slowly, carefully, I began to document everything. Not for publication. The world isn't ready for that truth, but for the next bridge, for whoever comes after me. So they don't have to start from nothing the way I did. Today, 2 years after reading my grandfather's diary, I live a life that would seem insane to my former self. I live in a small house near the Atlas Mountains, not far from the ancient well where it all began. The house sits on a boundary place, one of those rare spots where the veil between worlds is naturally thinner. My mornings begin with Fajr prayer, often with Djinn I can see praying alongside me in their own rows. We greet each other with respectful nods. Some have become friends of sorts. Others maintain formal distance. All recognize the sacred space of prayer as neutral ground. I spend my days counseling, mediating, learning. A woman comes because her daughter sees imaginary friends that seem too specific, too consistent to be childish fancy. I teach her how to determine if her daughter has the gift, and if so, how to help her navigate it safely. A Djinn comes because he's fallen in love with a human woman, but knows the impossibility and danger of such attachment. I counsel patience, caution, and ultimately, the wisdom of distance. Not all love stories have happy endings. Not all bridges should be crossed. An elderly imam visits because his mosque has been experiencing disturbances, objects moving, strange sounds during prayer. I investigate and find a minor Djinn who's been driven from his long-time dwelling by new construction, now seeking refuge in the only spiritual space he knows. I mediate a solution. The Djinn may remain, but must respect the mosque's sanctity and cease the disturbances. The imam never knows the exact nature of the problem, but the disturbances stop. This is my life now, strange, solitary in some ways, fulfilling in others. I keep my grandfather's diary in a safe place, reading it when I need guidance or simply to feel connected to him. I understand now why he wrote it all down. The burden of secrecy is crushing without some outlet, some way to make it real. Zarka and I have developed our own relationship, separate from her connection to my grandfather. She's become mentor, friend, sometimes antagonist when she pushes me harder than I want to be pushed. She's teaching me things about spirituality that no human scholar could, because she's experienced centuries of seeking Allah from a non-human perspective. "You're doing well," she told me recently. "Rashid would be proud." I still make mistakes. Last week I completely misjudged a situation and nearly caused a major incident between Malik. She cut me off with a smile. Rashid made mistakes too. Being a bridge doesn't mean being perfect. It means being willing to stand in the gap even when you're uncertain. You're doing exactly what you should be doing. I'm sharing this story now because I believe the world is ready to start hearing it. Not everyone will believe. Most will dismiss it as creative fiction. But for those few who recognize the truth in these words, for those who've always sensed there's more to reality than what we can see, this is for you. The invisible world is real. It's not evil or good. It simply is. Jinn exist, as the Quran tells us. They struggle with faith, make choices, seek meaning, just as we do. They're not demons to be feared, or genies to be commanded. They're fellow creations of Allah walking their own paths. My grandfather's 40-year secret taught me that love transcends boundaries we think are absolute, that faith means accepting mysteries we can't fully explain, that sometimes the most sacred truths are the ones we must carry alone, hidden, until the right moment to share them. If you're reading this and something in you recognizes the truth of it, if you've always felt slightly out of step with the world, if you've seen things from the corner of your eye, if you've sensed presences that others don't, then perhaps you too carry a thin veil. Perhaps you too are meant to be a bridge. Don't fear it. Don't reject it. Seek understanding. Seek guidance. And remember, you're not alone even when it feels like you are. We bridges find each other eventually. To those who simply enjoyed this as a story, take from it what resonates. Consider the possibility that the world is stranger and more wonderful than we usually allow ourselves to believe. Consider that faith and reason don't have to be enemies, that mystery and truth can coexist. Subscribe to this channel if these stories resonate with you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And ask yourself, if you discovered there was more to the world than you can see, what would you choose to do with that knowledge? As my grandfather taught me, and as I now pass on to you, true strength isn't in dominating others, but in serving a purpose greater than yourself. True sight isn't just seeing what's there, but understanding what it means. The diary sits on my desk as I write this. 40 years of my grandfather's life, distilled into worn pages and faded ink. Soon I'll begin my own journal, for whoever comes next, for the next bridge, because this isn't just my story or my grandfather's story, it's the story of everyone who's ever stood between worlds and chosen to serve rather than exploit, to understand rather than fear, to love rather than hate. The invisible world is watching. It always has been. The question is, are you ready to see it back? Assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you, in the world you can see and in the world you can't. Until we meet again either in this realm or the next, remember, you are never as alone as you think you are, and the bridges between worlds are stronger than they appear.